the whole world knows the name Washington, D.C. What does it mean? Well, of course, it's named after George Washington, the general who defeated the English in the American Revolution. Washington, D.C. But there's a D.C., a District of Columbia, after the name of Washington. What is the District of Columbia? You know, a lot of people have seen Columbia pictures. They see the logo when the woman comes out, and the beautiful woman, and she's holding a great flame in her hand, or a great light, the great torch, the torch of knowledge, of light, because Satan comes as an angel of light. That's his light. She's his goddess, and she's holding up that light. But why would the District of Columbus be called that?
Why not the District of Christ? You know,
Yeah,
it's the District of Columbia,
There
a
you
false
go.
goddess.
There you go, a
And
false
it's
goddess.
just a totally pagan place.
A totally
Everywhere
pagan place.
you turn is paganism.
That's right.
Then go to the individual state capitals and you'll find the same idolatry. I remember as a child touring the state capital in Sacramento, California, and seeing the seal of the great state of California, which is Athena. And here's a statue of Athena, and here's another statue of Athena. And look at the capitals of the states themselves. In fact, even the symbol of our nation is a graven image, because the Statue of Liberty is a graven image by anybody's definition. It is a carved image of man. Now you say, well, it's a woman. But here's the thing. It's a man that's dressed up as a woman. I'm not kidding. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not. See, Lady Liberty is actually patterned after the Greek god Prometheus. That god right there is the light bearer, or Lucifer even. The one who brings the light, who is the one who supposedly among the gods brought down knowledge, right? How, like, sort of like the knowledge of good and evil, perhaps? Like, hey, eat of that tree and you'll be like gods. Prometheus, was the one who did that. And that is a replica of Prometheus.
They're all idols of Satan. That's what we have in Washington, D.C. They're beautiful. Oh, yes, they're beautiful. They're lovely. They're made of stone. But they are of the devil.
Here on the top of the Capitol Dome in Washington, you can see the Goddess of Freedom, also known as Semiramis, Queen of Babylon, who later became Isis of Egypt. Now, we suggest the dome itself represents the womb of the goddess. So, if the dome represents the womb of the goddess, we should find nearby the phallus of the god, ready to impregnate her and bring forth the spirit of the sun god. And we most certainly do. Facing the dome is the phallus of the sun god, the Washington Monument. During his research for his amazing book, Apollyon Rising 2012, which actually hit #1 in the book charts the day of its release, Dr. Tom Horn travelled to Washington D.C., where he met with Masons at the House of the Temple, the headquarters of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. Horn says these men were very cordial and mostly responsive to his questions. They even confirmed his understanding of the influence of Freemasonry in American history. It was only when he pressed one of them about a ritual called the raising ceremony, the raising of Osiris from the dead, it's also known as, which is conducted in the temple room on the 3rd floor of the building. It's only then that these Masons became evasive and visibly uncomfortable. The reason for this, according to Dr. Horn, is that in addition to the raising ceremony being conducted when members reach the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, this strange ceremony is performed without public knowledge in this very temple room at the inauguration of every United States president. Why is that? Because deep esoteric meaning behind Egyptian and Rosicrucian magic that was incorporated into the rites and rituals of Freemasonry hold that the spirit of Osiris can be raised from the underworld and installed, for want of a better term, in the reigning king or president. According to Tom Horn, this is why the US Capitol dome is laid out so as to face the obelisk, the phallus of the sun god, known as the Washington Monument. An interesting point regarding the obelisk in Washington, the Washington Monument. The column is 6,666 inches high, and each side is 666 inches long. Now, obviously, this cannot be an accident, because we remember that the Antichrist's number in the Bible is 666.
Not just the capital, but the geographical layout of the whole of Washington D.C. was carefully designed, and the capital itself is just one component. Take a look at this photo and notice its relation to the Washington Monument, one of the most famous obelisks in the world. Notice how similar this is to the Vatican's layout. This exact same layout can be found in Paris also, and many other cities. Why this configuration? The key to this is perhaps the dome, which dominates these buildings. In many ancient cultures, the dome shape represented the female principle, or the womb. When you have the male principle, which is the obelisk, connected to the female principle, it was believed by occultists that a third entity, a kind of spiritual energy, is produced. We've already seen that idea in the square and compass logo. In occultism, the idea is also quite prevalent that certain shapes and colours either create or diffuse energies. We're quite familiar with this concept today in the form of feng shui, which was a craze a while ago. Arranging your furniture in relation to what they do with energies to create balance. You can think of this kind of arrangement between the obelisk and the dome as a kind of feng shui designed to generate a spiritual power. Now if we go inside the Capitol and look up at the dome, we see this. Now this dome looks almost exactly the same as the one in the Vatican, and at the top is a painting called the Apotheosis. It was painted by an artist called Constantino Brumidi. His story is interesting because in his younger years he became famous for his paintings commissioned by the Vatican. In 1848 there was a Masonic attempt to overthrow the power of the Pope, and although it was ultimately unsuccessful, this guy who made a living painting for the Vatican, Brumidi, was surprisingly found to be one of the guilty chief conspirators. After that he was shipped off to the USA, and there he made a name for himself by working for occult societies. It was he who painted this painting, which creates a kind of Masonic mirror image to the Vatican. The whole setup of the Capitol, dome and obelisk is present in the Masonic Washington and in the Catholic Vatican. Now this would seem odd for two seemingly opposed ideologies to do this, but then we remember Alice A. Bailey's pronouncement. There is no question, therefore, that the work to be done in familiarizing the general public with the nature of the mysteries is of paramount importance at this time. These mysteries will be restored to outer expression through the medium of the Church and the Masonic fraternity. Bailey predicted that the mystery religion would start to become familiar to the general public through both the Church, meaning the false Church, and the Masonic fraternity. This two-pronged attack appear to be on opposing sides but are working towards the same end. Remember that the founder of the Illuminated Masons, Adam Weishaupt, had actually come from the Catholic Jesuit order, but after creating the Masonic Illuminati, he claimed to be anti-Catholic. The Masons and Church appear to be opposed, but in fact are both puppets of Satan. At the top of the Capitol dome we find this statue, who symbolically faces east towards the sunrise. This is the goddess of reason who the French enthroned at Notre Dame, or as we've come to know her since the beginning of this study, Asherah or Ashtoreth. She pops up absolutely everywhere. This particular idol was designed by a Freemason, Thomas Crawford, and is standing on top of a spherical shape which almost certainly represents the earth, around which is written in Latin, E pluribus unum. This means, out of many, one. Now remember, there's always a light side and dark side to every symbol, so the lighter good meaning for public consumption is calling for the unity of the American people, which was made up of immigrants. The dark hidden meaning is that the whole world will be united under the feet of this enigmatic goddess. The American form of Asherah is mostly known as Columbia. The DC in Washington D.C. actually stands for Washington District of Columbia, so effectively it's like saying that it's her district, her territory where she rules. Now the definition of apotheosis is the exaltation of a subject to a divine level. So who are they exalting to a divine level here? Well, if we look closer we see that it's the same man who stands under the dome, George Washington. Look at the bottom and you will see the goddess Columbia or Asherah, and then George Washington is depicted directly above her. It represents the deification of the man George Washington. Note the pose he is striking with his left arm raised and his right hand extended outwards. He was depicted in a similar manner when this statue was commissioned. Now this statue is again elevating Washington to a position of God, as it was modelled on Zeus. It was meant to go on display at the Capitol, but after it was found to make people uncomfortable, it was moved to the Smithsonian Museum instead. What is extraordinary is that this pose is more commonly associated with Baphomet, the horned goat god that represents Satan. Remember when we turned the pentagram representing man upside down, we got Baphomet. So if the painting intends to elevate the man Washington to the level of a god, we are forced to ask the question, what kind of god? Incidentally, while Baphomet is on the screen, you may also notice that it has both male and female features, which is the usual male and female, light and dark from one source theme that we've already seen countless times. If we go back to the painting one more time, we see that the other figures that surround Washington are also ancient gods and goddesses from pagan mythologies. The likes of Atlantis, Venus, Vulcan, Ceres and Minerva, all in reality just demons looking for worship. Directly beneath the dome is the Capitol's crypt, and on the centre of the floor there is a bronze sun symbol. This symbol is geographically the literal centre of Washington D.C, and all street addresses are attributed in relation to it. You will actually find many pagan gods littered all around the Capitol building. This is just one final example representing Mars to be found near the entrance.
Some of the things I'm about to show you, but didn't see what I was seeing, and even though I was looking right at it. With eyes to see, Washington D.C. takes on a whole new life. This right here, this is the roof of the train station. So we walked out of the train station, I looked up, and the whole roof of the train station is lined with pagan gods. And I read this first little plaque right there. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it talks about lightning and electricity and how that's been beneficial to mankind. And at the bottom of that, it says, "Thou hast put all things under his feet." Well, that sounds like Scripture, doesn't it? Who does that refer to in Scripture? Jesus. The problem is that's Zeus standing right next to that plaque. Zeus. Washington D.C. is full of Zeus worship. And what's interesting is it goes all the way back to our founding, really. Right after George Washington died, this is a government-commissioned statue that was created, okay? A government-commissioned statue was made of George Washington. And what did they do? They depict him as a god sitting on a throne. Which god? Zeus. This is a rendition right here of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the statue of Zeus and the temple of Zeus. And just to prove that that is in fact Zeus that he is being portrayed as, if you see just kind of on the left side of him, on the side of his throne, you can see kind of something there. That is Hercules. And on the other side, it's Apollo, 2 sons of Zeus. So yes, that is George depicted as Zeus. So, when we start thinking about our country, We say one nation under God, right? And people like David Barton will have you believe that our founding fathers were Christians and that this was a Christian-founded country. Well, sorry to disappoint you, but I'm going to show you a few things that would beg to differ with that idea. Yes, there were Puritans on the boat, there were Pilgrims on the boat, but there were also Rosicrucians on the boat, Illuminists on the boat, Freemasons on the boat, and unfortunately those were the guys that wrote up all our documents and designed Washington, D.C. and built all the buildings. Those guys were not Christians. They were deists at best, but they were not Christians. When we think of Osiris, America, and the number 13, number 13, how many of you remember growing up and being told about the Betsy Ross flag and the 13 colonies and all that 13? Well, we've got the Great Seal of America that has the eagle on the front and the pyramid on the back, and I got the Betsy Ross flag there. So we got 13 steps on the Great Seal's pyramid. 13 letters in the Latin phrase Annuit Coeptis. 13 letters in E pluribus unum. 13 stars above the eagle. That's the Star of David there, but that has nothing to do with David. The Star of David is not a good thing. 13 bars on the shield. 13 leaves on the olive branch. 13 arrows. 13 original colonies. 13 signers of the Declaration of Independence. 13 stars and 13 stripes on our original Betsy Ross flag. What's the big deal with 13? Well, in the mythology, Osiris was hacked up into 14 pieces, but one of them was missing, and that's the one that was fashioned into an obelisk. So, really all you have left is 13 pieces of Osiris. So everything to do with Osiris revolves around that number. And so does just about everything in our country by the Illuminists who worship him. Everybody was taught, if you went to the same secular schools that like I did, that the Betsy Ross flag, right there, the 13 stripes, 13 stars, was done by Betsy Ross. The problem is you can go to history.org and they say there's absolutely no historical proof whatsoever that Betsy Ross ever made an American flag, or that Washington had anything to do with it either. And in fact, apparently the whole story is made up by one of her descendants, a guy by the name of Canby. Made up the whole story. There's no historical documents whatsoever to validate that story, yet that's what we were all taught. So who did create the flag? Well, there's an individual by the name of Francis Hopkins that History.org identifies as most likely the designer of that flag. That guy was one of the 13 signers of the Declaration of Independence. He had a strong interest in designing symbols and played a key role in creating the Great Seal of the United States, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and what all the iconography on that thing represents. He's the guy that they credit for creating the 13 stripes and the 13 star flag. Well, I would say if you're really interested in going deep in this, because we don't have time to go a whole lot deeper in that, check out Chris Pinto's documentaries. He's got some outstanding documentaries. These are just a few of them. The Hidden Faith of Our Founding Fathers, The New Atlantis, Riddles in Stone, and Eye of the Phoenix. They will really open your eyes. Let's take a little tour of Washington, D.C. Sadly, we only had 5 hours there, and you can't see much in 5 hours. You need like 2 weeks to go through Washington, D.C. So we had to be very intentional about the places we went to and the things that we looked at. So of course we went to the Capitol building. But before I show you that, who can tell me what D.C. stands for? District of Columbia. So our country is ruled by the District of Columbia. Well, who's Columbia? So start asking the questions, right? Well, we walk over there to the Capitol building, and there's Columbia perched on top. And if you notice, she's standing on like a globe, and it says E pluribus unum right there. Who can tell me what E pluribus unum means? Anybody remember from school? Yes, out of many one. What were you taught in school that means? E pluribus unum, out of many one. What were you taught in school? What did they tell you that means? Yeah, many states, one nation, a lot of ethnicities, we're all a melting pot, one nation. That's what we're taught. The problem I have with that is that symbols, whenever you look at a symbol, the iconography contained within a symbol has to harmonize with itself. Okay? So now we have a pagan goddess on the top of our Capitol building and E pluribus unum at her feet. What's going on there? Well, we walked into the Capitol building, and there's the original sculpture that the one on the roof was made from, right there. And we go into, this is in the visitor center, we go into the movie theater place there where they give you a little movie on the history of the making of the Capitol building, the building of the Capitol building. And it starts off by calling it the Temple of Liberty. And I turned to my wife and said, temple? Temples are for gods. Right? What God? Well, we just passed her in the hallway. Who is she? Who is Columbia? She is known as the Queen of Heaven. All throughout the scriptures, all throughout ancient history, throughout many cultures, she has many names. Semiramis being one of them. Ishtar, from which we get Easter. Isis, Columbia, Liberty, Diana, Venus. These are just a few of her names. Just like Nimrod, she's the wife of Nimrod, Semiramis. She's an interesting character, by the way. My research has shown me that Cush had a daughter named Semiramis, whom he later married, his own daughter, and produced Nimrod. Okay, so that means that Semiramis is Nimrod's half-sister and mother. And then Nimrod turns around and marries Semiramis. So now his wife is also his half-sister and mother. And in her incarnation in the mythology of Isis, after Osiris is hacked up into 14 pieces, only 13 of which were found, she fashions an obelisk to represent the missing piece, which was his phallus, and somehow gets impregnated, which I just think is some way of talking about artificial insemination. Gives birth to Horus, who in our Bible is Tammuz, who later marries Semiramis. So, if you want to look at Scripture, who's the whore of Babylon? That's her. Okay? And she's always has to do with sexual stuff. That's the whore of Babylon, right there. So a lot of people like to try to take some of these titles in the Scriptures and make them allegorical, metaphorical, everything symbolic. You know, maybe it's New York City. That's the whore of Babylon right there. Now, our country, the District of Columbia, clearly worships her in the Temple of Liberty. So we walked into, oh, by the way, that takes on a whole new meaning. E pluribus unum. When you take the iconography of a symbol and harmonize it with itself, it's talking out of one person, many names. Many gods represented by one person. All right? We go into the rotunda of the Capitol building. And this is where the lower level there, you know, these nice pretty paintings, that's where people like David Barton from Wall Builders Association likes to focus on those. And he travels all around the country going to churches saying, we have a Christian heritage in this country. Our founding fathers were Christians. How many of you were taught that? You know, George Washington, all these guys. No, they weren't. Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits. All right, and David Barton likes to take selected quotes from people like Thomas Jefferson that sound good, but he conveniently ignores all the other quotes that Thomas Jefferson made that are clearly antichrist. Totally antichrist. These guys were deists. They were not Christians. And the proof is all over Washington, D.C. if you have eyes to see. Yeah.